There's a trend that we've witnessed in smartphones over the last few years. Despite cornerstone releases happening throughout the year, phone manufacturers eventually cap off the year with an updated variant. Thing is, this trend goes one of two ways. Either it is a straight upgrade to the flagship it is related to, or it is a more affordable offshoot. There's also one more thing that they tend to have in common, some sort of letter added to the naming convention. I think Xiaomi in their latest release has managed to embody a bit of every aspect I just mentioned, even if we don't exactly know what T stands for still. Well, this is Pocketnow and I'm Joshua Vergara. What's going on, everybody? Here are my thoughts on the Xiaomi Mi 10T Pro. Xiaomi and its umbrella companies have been doing a ton of work in the last couple of years, putting out releases in various price brackets. Quite a bit of that experience actually shows in the Mi 10T Pro, which is the most premium of Xiaomi's latest triple release. You get the high-end standards in the Snapdragon 865, 8GB of RAM, and 128GB of onboard storage. And then there's a large 5000 mAh battery that is very fast to charge at 50 watts for wired and 30 watts for wireless. And it's all encased in a body that covers the aluminum frame in attractive glass. Xiaomi can go pretty hard in the design cues, but I find this phone a little subdued in the flashiness department. Maybe it's partially because of the colorway that I was given, since silver and blue editions are also available. And maybe this design is a bit utilitarian to me because the camera hump is the obvious eye-catcher. Thankfully, the ergonomics are on par, as the curved back helps the phone sit nicely when gripped. And true to Xiaomi form, there is a grippy, soft, plastic clear case included in the box that is a little more on the nose with the branding. Now, MIUI continues to be what we expect as well, from the massive feature set to the somewhat intrusive advertising. It is still highly customizable in the fundamentals, like a theme engine is included, there's app drawer organization, and then there are gesture controls for things like quick screenshots. There are, as always, a ton of extras in MIUI, but with a little bit of elbow grease, you can actually put a lot of the bloat aside. Personally, I go straight to the dark mode, and I turn off all of the different app drawer options, making sure that it's just a clean app drawer, and I basically never use other features like the dual app or the quick ball. Gaming features are accessed by launching games through the Game Turbo app. From there, you can get a panel that gives you options for enhancing the color output, turning off floating notifications, or just getting shortcuts to certain applications. Now, I know there's one thing you want me to mention, and it's the ads. Yes, there are ads sprawled about certain parts of the UI. There are a couple of key places where they show up. When you make a folder, you can actually set it so that it will suggest other applications to you, which will appear slightly grayed out. And then when you're installing new apps, the MIUI system check will take that opportunity to show you an ad for yet another app. Is it annoying? Well, it never really has been for me, but quite a few of you tend to speak up in the comments whenever MIUI is the topic. Thankfully for all of you, turning off the system ads is actually pretty easy to do. So ultimately, there's very little to complain about in terms of sheer performance, because this is the kind of spec that we've come to expect. Maybe the details aren't particularly overachieving. For example, you don't get the Snapdragon 865 Plus in here. The lack of a headphone jack is a tired complaint by now, but it is a detail worth noting. And given the nature of the high refresh rate screen, the fingerprint reader was moved over to the power button. But all of this seems to point to a certain balance that Xiaomi is striking in this T model. So where exactly did they put their focus? Well, no pun intended there, but of course the camera is an obvious answer, but we'll get to that after we talk about this wonderful display. I focused on the core experience of the phone in the first half of this video because it is literally what you would expect. Premium specifications powering a robust interface. So how does a 144Hz refresh rate screen factor into all of this? Well, as one of the centerpieces of the Mi 10T Pro, it points to what I believe is the philosophy of this device. Xiaomi knows that they can provide a good experience, so what are the tools that they can include, or enhance in this case, to make it just that little bit better? It's up to you if 144Hz is just a little bit better, but let's face it, the high refresh rate just makes MIUI and Android glide along like butter on a hot pan. Everything is so smooth and pleasant to interact with when the high refresh rate is activated. To be fair, it is adaptive. The display settings let you set it as 90Hz as the locked rate, or you can go even lower to 60Hz. But when pushing this panel to its fastest rate, it will only do so when the situation is right. But that's the thing, not many apps or games can even get that high in the refresh rate, and we've known this from previous fast displays. Popular games like Among Us, Call of Duty, and Genshin Impact, which I'm just starting, they just don't get that high. So while it is a feature that is worthy of praise, it's not something that will revolutionize your everyday life. This has been known throughout 2020's high refresh rate love affair. I've also seen quite a few people talking about the fact that this is an LCD screen, and they think it's a significant downgrade. Personally, I don't think that, especially since the Mi 10 Pro that came before this T variant is still around, and that one had a Super AMOLED screen at 90Hz and sports basically all of the same specifications. So it's not like there's no way to get this kind of experience with an AMOLED panel. Now, to be fair, the blacks aren't as deep as on an AMOLED, but that's the nature of LCD. Colors are otherwise still pleasing and are customizable if you want more saturation. But one cool thing about an IPS screen is that the display can get massively bright, which is great for situations like being in broad daylight, like I was when I took the camera out on a sunny day. High numbers continue with the cameras, which are prominent in that big camera hump. That main sensor is huge, which is always cool to see but isn't exactly new anymore. The 108 megapixel sensor here is of similar spec to the previous Mi 10 Pro, but the overall package did shave off one of the lenses. So instead of an included telephoto, this camera relies on the high resolution of the big sensor to do some quality digital crops. Instead, you get a 13 megapixel ultra-wide and a 5 megapixel macro sensor. Now I know, macro sensors are always a bit of a questionable inclusion, but I'll give it props for the decent quality results, and the fact that you can actually shoot macro video too. It also really lives up to the macro name. You can actually get super close like this to any given subject. The 13 megapixel ultra-wide is used in conjunction with the 108 megapixel sensor for certain features like AI 8K recording, which I don't think most people will use because the 4K at 30 and 60 frames is perfectly fine. One mode that is really nice is the steady mode, which splits the focal length difference between the ultra-wide and the main sensor to achieve both optical and digital smooth stabilization. The only bummer is that the super steady video is only recorded in 1080p. Now that whole resolution bummer can be levied at the front-facing camera, which is a 20 megapixel shooter with robust beauty and portrait modes, but can only shoot up to 1080p video. Those bummers I just mentioned actually give a look into the greater picture of the Mi 10T Pro camera. Xiaomi seems to have figured out the right hardware toolset and is just throwing all of its software features into it, with admittedly mixed results. You see, the main sensor, no surprise, is simply pretty great. It's Xiaomi's processing that might get a bit aggressive at times, but that's something we've seen in many of their other flagships. They're always hardcore with the software, and it shows in the laundry list of modes and settings. Just in the main photo and video modes alone, you can turn on certain features like a movie frame that bakes in letterboxing for a more cinematic, dramatic look. There's a vlog mode that takes the guesswork out of camera movements and transitions, guiding the user step by step. Long exposures were a big deal for this camera because the OIS in the main camera sensor is actually very effective. Even in brightly lit situations, a 3-second long exposure stabilized in my hands can easily get me the soft water trail look. But honestly, all of the modes end up feeling a little bit superfluous because they don't take full advantage of the camera's capabilities. All of the video modes I just mentioned would be better if they yielded 4K results as well. Clone mode should work on the front-facing camera too, because right now it requires a tripod and a second person to hit the record button. When it comes to the fundamentals, the hardware speaks for itself, and Xiaomi's shotgun approach to feature sets hits the mark some of the time. We just need some of this extra fun to use more of the power that's provided. In the end, this T variant did everything I expect offshoot releases to do. It brings fresh but significant features like a 144Hz refresh rate screen, and optimized what already worked by going in on the 108 megapixel main sensor, giving it some good OIS, and then adding in a lot of camera software features. But what I was surprised by is how Xiaomi struck the right balance and thus were able to price the Mi 10T Pro right. The base model starts at €599, which is actually refreshing considering the Mi 10 Pro originally started off at $999 to the dismay of many Xiaomi fans. And if anything, prices like this are slowly but surely normalizing certain features that we once thought were only for these super expensive phones. It's not to say that we should always expect Xiaomi to have lower priced flagships, but in prioritizing just the right things in the Mi 10T Pro, they've probably recaptured a good amount of people that thought the previous model was asking for too much. So as far as the trend of T devices are concerned, bring them on, as long as they are continuing this type of optimization. If anything, I want to pass the question off to all of you. Were you kind of disappointed by the price of the Mi 10 Pro and thus are really excited for what the Mi 10T Pro is bringing to the table? Let me know your thoughts on the display as well. How do you feel about the whole LCD thing, even though the bright IPS display does get to that really high refresh rate? Let me know whatever you think about the Xiaomi Mi 10T Pro by getting into the comment sections down below. below. From there, you can drop some likes on this video and follow Pocketnow across the interwebs and here on the channel by subscribing to it if you haven't already. With all that said, I'm going to go ahead and call it on this one. Thank you so much for watching, take care of yourselves and each other, and we will see you in our next video.